as I say, thank you very much for having me. Today I'm talking about AI and higher education and what this means for teaching, learning, and assessment. I think this is something that is very topical, and it is quite a nice, complex question. But let's get into it. The advent of generative AI in the form of LLM from OpenAI's ChatGPT 3.5 and at the end of 2022, and the release of Bard, and as well as the hundreds and thousands of new wrappers that are continuously developed with this technology being repacked and resold, has evoked a global debate from higher education institutions. I think from December last year, debates just really ran rapid around what do we do about generative AI, which is, again, not something new, but it is something that is disruptive, if we can borrow the term from Silicon Valley. And these debates also range from issues of ethics. Should we be using it? Should we control it? Should we ban it? Who made it? Who's been exploited in the building of this? For instance, the outsourced labor to countries like Kenya, India, and Venezuela, who developed these models at a pittance of the cost. And also, I think the biggest debate point was, how will generative AI in these models challenge assessment security? Or to put it plainly, how would it enable student cheating? Now, these debates actually polarized universities and academics, and put everybody on a spectrum. On the one side, you have those that have argued AI should be embraced in teaching, learning, and assessment, and put forward, very novel ideas of how AI could or should or be used in teaching and learning, as well as in assessment, by designing our courses and assessments in particular ways. If anybody's interested, go and Google Monash University in Australia. I think they were the first institution that said, yes, let's do it. We're going to reference this machines, but here is a way for you to do it. And I think they were one of the first to have really innovative approaches to that. On the other side of the spectrum, you had those who've argued that we should outrightly ban these machines. We should not even have university students be able to access it on their system. And we should limit it in teaching and learning, and definitely in assessment. And again, this approach, I think it was soon realized that it's futile, because everybody was looking at one player, ChatGPT, but nobody was really seeing how much or how many different options there are. Like you can see on the picture, we used to track these in January, February, and March. And at certain days, you get about 4,000 new web apps created daily that would do something similar to ChatGPT or Moonbeam, and find different ways. We can help you do your homework. We can help you write SEO code. All of these different ways of doing things. And also, many of these spaces realize the genie is out the bottle. You cannot put it back. The bell cannot be unrung. Now, much of these debates are still playing out in higher education globally, and definitely the same in South Africa. And it's playing out very similar to what happened when we shifted online to online teaching and learning, or emergency remote teaching during COVID. Similar to that, much focus has been given to generative AI and its role in teaching and learning, but very much the big question is, what do we do about assessment? There is some focus on research as well, how this would influence research and how we could utilize some of these affordances. And there's a certain group of researchers that are also starting to talk about postgraduate work. What does AI mean for a thesis? And again, those are sometimes too big, and I'm not going to talk about them all because I would take a whole day. But what I will argue in this presentation is that the relationship between higher education and AI is complex. It is very much emerging at the moment, and I think we're going to be in constant change for a while until we make sense of what is happening with these new technologies. Like our first presenter said, even from a legal perspective, there are still debates, and I think those are also around in South Africa and around issues of academic integrity, or is it cheating or is it fraud? So it is not clear. So regardless of that, I think we need to ask deep questions about higher education and AI, and I think we need to take our time to and be careful in our and considerate in our formulation of our response, right? I think we're in a unique position to make decisions at what seems to be a very pivotal moment in time in this information age. And we need to not only focus on the short-term issues, like securing assessments, etc., but I think we need to realize that from a higher education point of view, we're in that position to make decisions now that will shape what higher education will look like in future. But I think we need to base those on what higher education and writing would look like in 5 or 6 years' time. And I know looking at the future is a fool's errand, but I think we need to base our decisions about what is coming. Now, to fully understand the influence of AI, I think it's not so much focusing on the technology, but I think we need to ask some questions and etch out, some core ideas about what is the purpose of higher education, what is the role of knowledge in higher education, and then how is that linked to how do we assess this knowledge, and ultimately, how do we ensure academic integrity or prevent cheating, depending on how you would want to see it. And I think only if we answer these can we really say what would be the affordances and constraints of this new technology and its increasing disruptive power. So when we look at the purpose of higher education, I think we need to think about universities in South Africa as an institution within society. Universities are not a society on itself. It is very much influenced by its context. And, given the extent of inequality in South Africa, coupled with the many challenges we have as a country, from economic issues to infrastructure to load shedding, etc., the list goes on. And if we couple that with the history of higher education in South Africa as an elite closed system that has opened up for many of the previously excluded population groups and the resultant massification of higher education, all of these influence where we find ourselves right now. And we add in another layer of technology to it. I think it is imperative that we look not just at the technology, but look at this relationship that we find ourselves in. I also would argue that it is also then no surprise that for many of our students, if not most of them, attending university to earn a degree is to find meaningful employment, to get a livable wage, preferably higher, and to lift themselves out of poverty, but also the rest of their family. So, this is a high stakes game to play for most of our students. And this also has a knock-on effect on what the university does and how we respond in terms of the changing social context, but also the changing technological context. Sorry, I think this, I also think that most students access to the university, and if we view it as being socially upwardly mobile, it's about getting a credential. So A lot of students see the university as an extension of schooling, and I think society sees it as well. It's an extension of schooling, and the university is a credentialing institution. Now, if we have this instrumentalist view of higher education, we can view students as they come in, they pay their fees, sometimes they pay themselves, sometimes there's a form of a bursary or a government subsidy in the form of a NSFAS loan or bursary. Students come in, they attend classes, they complete assignments, tests, exams, practicals, do some locum hours if they have to. And when they are complete and they've done these to a satisfactory level, then they receive a degree vouching that they've attained this minimum standard. Now, this very narrow view of what higher education is, if that is all that we think higher ed is, then we have problems. Then I think we really have a significant challenge that a generative AI can pose serious risks to what we do. Regardless of that, I also still I think that this very instrumentalist view of what higher ed is then also intrinsically linked to what the role of knowledge would be. Now, in this instrumentalist view, knowledge is a commodity which students can then buy. Universities sell them in the form of a degree, a very expensive receipt. And it's very tempting to assume that this is the primary role of universities, while actually providing credentials is only one small part of what universities do. And this is only one of the many roles that universities should be doing. The literature does argue that universities are a public good. We are funded by the state, at least by 2/3, and sometimes more, and sometimes less. But the essence is we are funded by the state. Thus, we need to provide some form of public good. And this is done by creating powerful knowledge, that is useful to society and to the world and engages us in answering some of the wicked problems we have. And we do this from various disciplines through various forms of teaching, which is one component. We do it by research, community engagement, which has become an important marker for universities, and also the development of thought leaders, having public intellectuals that challenge hegemonic ideas. So if we understand universities as these broader in these broader terms, there's quite a bit of literature that says, well, this is what universities ought to do, but also this is what students need to have from their time at university. And these range from outcomes to graduate attributes, critical thinking, all of these other type of markers for what we need to instill. And again, a lot of that is very much framed around those instrumental views, and that we need to be able to measure what we give our students and what they take from here. However, one view that's very appealing and has been argued quite extensively is if we change the way that we understand what the role of knowledge is in university, to again be much broader and not a skills-based idea, then it would be useful for us. And even in relation to AI, and hopefully the argument will land that for you. So, and the idea that I want to argue for is what Paul Ashwin has argued, is that university education should transform students by the knowledge they are studying, and change their understanding of themselves and the world around them, as well as their place in the world. So knowledge needs to be transformational and not just simply a completion of assessment tasks, like improving memorization of facts, gaining new information, or writing multiple choice questionnaires, tests. Even though it might you have to do some of these. I'm not saying you're not going to do them, but I think if we think about what the role of knowledge is for universities and specifically for education, if fostering that transformational relationship and with powerful knowledge is the goal, then we need to think about our assessment in different ways as well. Sorry. So to illustrate that, I'm a sociologist by training, as on top of many different things. But in my teaching, when I was teaching undergrads, my idea was always to instill the idea that the knowledge that we're talking about is not just some theoretical outside. It's something that we need to make sense of the world, but also where we fit in that world, because that is something that sociologists would have to do. And I would argue that it's probably the same for instance, most pharmacists who would need to not only know how to dispense certain drugs, but also would need to know the fundamentals and the chemistry so that, i.e., they don't kill us by giving us two drugs that have dire effects on our health. Again, there are many debates about how this transformational relationship can be developed. And again, I'm not going to go into too much because there's volumes around that. I think what is important here is that if education is transformational, we also need to realize that it's complex. But when we think about AI, the question that comes in is, how will AI change how we create these conditions for students to develop this transformational relationship with this powerful knowledge? And how and if AI will improve or constrain this? Now, sorry. Now, what also comes up for me as a very important question is, how do we assess for this transformational relationship to knowledge? I mean, it's a very great idea, but how do we do that? And what would this look like? Or is this even possible in what feels like a new world for many academics and students? I went to a talk yesterday at UJ, also about ChatGPT. And I mean, it's been launched in December, well, beginning December. And yesterday, there were still students who don't know how to access it. And what would their reactions be, which would be very intriguing for me. Now, again, when we think about that, and I'm not going to focus on the pure mechanics of how we can do that, I think generative AI has and will continue to force us to rethink our assessment practices in terms of how, what, and why we do assessment. But I think we're in that moment in time where we have a small opportunity to relook an age-old practice, which is enshrined in the educational culture and is seldom critically examined, and that is of assessment, the holy grail of what we do. And I think a very dominant approach to assessment in our educational culture has been the standard assessment paradigm, right? We write tests, we write exams, and we do our thing. I think everybody on this call has from primary school up until university work have done some form of standard assessment, either as a student or have been the one setting it up. And the problem with this approach is that it uses data to infer claims about student proficiency in one or more traits. Now, that sounds very fair and fine. And it's normally done, with assessment techniques like MCQs, essays, short answers, and we do them in these tutorials, assignments, or exams. And that traditional assessment is what, as I say, most of us have experienced, and that's also what we believe is the way you should be doing it. But I also argue that there's some, and again, the literature does make this argument, that there are some problems with this standard assessment paradigm. And, firstly, we normally only take snapshots of learning, and most of it is inauthentic. So if we think about our own work now, if you are an academic, you write a journal paper. If you're in the business world, you might have to write a report, a progress report on something, or a status report. And this tends to go through some feedback. You send it to colleagues, other people have input. If it's a journal article, you get the editors that would first give you a green light, your idea is okay. Then you get reviewer 1 and the dreaded reviewer 2. But interestingly, most of our assessment doesn't do that. I don't know about you. I haven't written an exam since I've finished, or I've never had to do one, at least for my work. Secondly, the standard assessment paradigm normally or does assess skills that are obsolete. And again, I'm going to reflect on my own space, but I think when we sit and reflect, we would be able to find some in different fields. So as a sociologist, we get taught how to work with quantitative data. And it's expected that you'd be able to at least perform some form of analysis. However, to understand the complex mathematics of, for instance, regression analysis, I don't think that is the focus of what we should do. But I remember in my undergrad, I had to do the mathematics, even though I didn't have mathematics in grade 11 or 12. So I was lost. Have I used that ever since then? No. What have I used? A software solution. So, and I would even be provocative here to say, if we think of the future of writing, will writing remain a human activity, or will it be transformed like mathematics was transformed by a calculator? It's a provocative question with no answer. Lastly, I think SAP is the standard assessment paradigm is also more prone to be challenged by AI due to the fact of the way that we set up our assessments, right? And that's purely in the way that we approach assessment. We create artifacts in the form of an essay, and these essays tend to be set up so that students can communicate ideas around specific things. Maybe we want to assess how inequality is reproduced in South Africa, but it's a standardized question. It has to be fair, valid, and tends to be formulaic, right? We have a rubric in most instances. And that tends to make, that assessment hollow, because the moment something's formulaic and standardized, it is susceptible to AI being a better writer. Now, as I said, most of this would sound very much familiar to us. And then, then most of our concerns should be, well, we don't have to worry about that. However, these things have been a problem even before the time of COVID. Gen AI has just gotten a lot of press, and yes, it's going to make it a lot more easier. But there have been software solutions like paraphrasers, which students have been able to access as early as, I think, 10 years ago, which are phenomenally good, where you paste in a piece of text from a journal article and it writes it for you as a third-year student. So what I'm saying here is, part of our challenge that we are facing now with AI is not a new one. The literature talks about cognitive offloading, is where we offload our academic work to a tool or another human. And this has been around for a number of years. Yeah.
Hi, sorry to interrupt you. Can you wrap up, perhaps? How far?
Sure. 2 minutes, and I'll be back. Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Fantastic. So what I was saying, there's all of these tools that we can offload to. Ghostwriting has also been a common practice. Our politicians, celebrities, and sports people do it. It's been on the doorstep of universities for a number of years. Just Google your own course and somebody help me write. You will find somebody on Gumtree that will gladly write your SAP for about 200 Rand. Also, another knee-jerk reaction has been that we need to police whatever AI can do, and that's problematic in its own right. The work of most plagiarism detection services is highly problematic. It's not reduced the rate of plagiarism. It's actually increased it. Why? Because we can actually police it. And there's some evidence that with COVID, the more we use similarity checkers, the higher the rate of cases. And also, just note, I'm naming them similarity checkers because none of them are plagiarism checkers. Such a thing does not exist. And we all tick the box to say, all of these companies are not liable when you exclude a student and you've done so wrongly. So I think I'll leave it there for now. I think that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niel, for those very critical questions. It is terribly important that some decision is made. Could you perhaps just give an indication what happens now? Is there a forum that is continuing with these questions, or is it just being done per university?
As far as I understand, there are some conversations. I don't think there's a university that's not talking about it. At Rhodes, we've had conversations, we've put out some form of guideline, but nobody has put a policy in place. And I think it's just simply because there's a problem in terms of how do we, number one, police it? Because one of the biggest similarity software solutions brought out a product in April, and within 3 minutes, I could circumvent it with another AI. So we can't really say we can catch it. There's also studies about the efficacy of that. Will their way of catching it really work when OpenAI can't even identify their own chatbots writing? So how do we catch it? So that's the one problem. The other problem is also what's happening, I think, in a lot of universities. We are taking that step back and saying, well, now we're going to have sit-down exams. And as much as I'm not saying that's the worst thing that we could do, it is, I don't think having high-stakes sit-down exams for everything is going to work. I think we need to expose our students to AI, and they need to be able to work with this. I mean, if we don't expose them to it now, to learn hands-on afterwards is going to put them at a disadvantage. And I mean, for most of us, the learning curve is very high still in universities. So yeah.
Very interesting. Gosh, we are in a dilemma as, yes, in higher education, in research, not research. Research seems to be thriving on this situation, but as higher education and as a society, this poses enormous dilemmas. Thank you very much for your presentation, Niel, and we will have your slides on the website with your permission, and then people can go and have a look at that